A beautiful disaster. Look here now, my audience, upon this beautiful disaster you're about to see. Herein is a case of the hideous, mocking neglect of the British Museum. You will note in a moment a chipped away hand and face that seems to have been redesigned by a smarmy museum employee hunched half mad over his work table with his bright light and magnifying glass on the table, or some employee what thought himself some kind of Picasso of the archaeology set. It's a terrible sight, but worst in the neglect of the figurine is the neglect of its story, as though the British Museum knew the story, which is perfectly findable in any number of Turkish history texts, because you wouldn't think the Turkish had gotten it together in terms of history if you were a white wealthy ghost on the board of the British Museum, but they have. The Turkish have. So therefore the British Museum, when the tag handler was handing out the tags, must have collectively shrugged. But yet this is Naboo, and not a member of the elite. Of course, the British Museum would ignore his story, which is the story of the everyman, the original story before the one that took place in ancient Greece with its happy flourish of democracy, at least among men. Nebu was a common bricklayer in his own time. He would go about cutting clay bricks and installing people in their homes if they could afford to feed him for some days and wanted a chimney built, for example. Nebu would build the chimney. This was the amazing thing, though. Nebu never would actually accept money. He only accepted the dinners and the roof over his head and perhaps a night of love if there were free maidens in the household. But he moved from job to job, bricklay to bricklay, until one day he fell down in the road and thereupon came into an encounter with a flock of laying hens. This documentary this documentarian is not sure, looking closely at this tag, that he has not before noted the letters and numbers in the bottom left corner of each tab, but let us hope together that it is not some sort of British Museum copyright notice that their lawyers can spin into a lawsuit against this feature film, or perhaps a copyright neglect in some sort of archaeological slash museum curator language that this documentarian was not hitherto before aware of. But anyhow, we shall forge on. In probably a momentary flash of comedy, the British Museum was kind enough to decorate this tag with the description fish and monsters, quote unquote. As to what is carved on the seal, quite blatantly the so-called monsters are griffins, heads of lions, bodies of horses, wings of vast condors, and so the British Museum must have been having a laugh, and we can at least grant that from time to time even a member of the Illuminati or of the Freemasons might once in a while might once in a great age while enjoying a joke with or at the very least a smile flickering across its face. This seal was to be used by the Turkish, probably not the probably Turkish, but not perhaps East Turkey, but the Turkish, and a way of holding their letters closed and knowing and letting the person know who's the original recipient of which letters came from who, and who with whom would the letters end their journeys. A bronze seal, not at all a goat's head. The British Museum and its glorious mislabeling scheme have dubbed this spout as being fashioned after a goat's head, when indeed it's a bull's head. But what is marvelous about this piece is the tone of surprise. Even seen from the distance of behind a pillar, one can tell where the bull is startled severely. Other grand characteristics of the spout include the elegant way the wood has been carefully carved and preserved, probably by the Urmians of the time, certainly not by the British Museum, and that even though this was what was basically known to use as a plug for bottles that would otherwise be left open, whoever owned the piece must have loved it and used it delicately. Perhaps it was made for a woman or an old man who would perch the bottle plug delicately and barely let the deteriorating oils from their fingers let soak into the wood and cause microscopic rot. And then, of course, the top must have been preserved in whomever's coffin as part of a favored object. But if you were of the time and only had a few possessions, then this cork with his delightful look of surprise was on his bullish face would have been just the thing. Here are some of the British Museum's top thieves. Picture getting them. Um, uh, um, oh, here are some of the British Museum's top thieves. Picture them then, wrecking ancient civilizations, posing for pictures in the manner of the very wealthy of their contemporary times, thinking then as they do now that there is somehow the ability to learn everything, or else just smoking opium with their saddle bearers, taking a break from their own busy minds. Left in a stairwell. Now aren't you glad when you turn over, you come out of work and you done as a child to your kind, and you were good, and yeah. Oh, break from their own busy mind. Now, aren't you glad when you turn over some work of art you'd done as a child to your kindly aunt that she didn't merely hang the artwork in the stairwell? You can't see the people's faces now because laws forbid them to be identified with, but these are faces concentrating in going down on going down and up steps, not looking for the way to the sky. Yeah, there's faces not looking to the sky. See, they're famous. Not looking to the sky to see the famous Theseus versus the Minotaur portrait that's been slapped dangerously halfway up the wall. And yes, we say dangerous because of all the untrustworthiness the British Museum provides. It's odd to reckon that they might be trusted to hang a great crushing block of stone above your head. This documentarian contends even the strongest man's head would go in like an egg upon being under this statue at the wrong place at the wrong time. So it's left to us to pause in the stairwell against the flow of traffic and look up at the tableau in wonder and caution. This tableau depicts in stone the very moment that Theseus met the Minotaur, and how Theseus must have been confused at the moment, for all the stories he'd likely been told had cracked him up ready to meet a man with the head of a bull, but he probably likely met was a man wearing a head of a bull, a crazy man who couldn't put up much of a fight against Theseus's sword fighting. The bull head must have twisted into a blinding position on the quote-unquote Minotaur's head every time he took a swing, and Theseus must have had no trouble dispatching him.